What is going on, everybody, and welcome back once again. My name is Jordan, also known as JMonster. Thank you for joining me for another replay battle. Today I am very pleased to present something to you guys that I think is pretty revolutionary in terms of what it can do to the Medieval 2 community. This isn't a mod that I see being covered a lot. Actually, I see almost no coverage for it, and I don't know why that is. It is absolutely amazing and targets the Medieval 2, like the vanilla kind of Medieval 2 multiplayer experience. It is called Igni Ferroque, or Iron and Fire in Latin, and it is pretty damned cool. So you can see one of the new maps here laid out before you. I don't remember the name of this map, but it's got some interesting terrain features, and we'll take a look at some of that in just a second. But really, all you need to know about this mod is that it has a unit that throws bees. No, really, I'm serious. There's a unit that throws bees, and it kicks a lot of ass. So yeah, without any further ado, let's take a look at some of the army comps, and I'll go over the units as best as I know them, and then we can get into the replay itself. I hope you guys enjoy it. The first army we're going to look at today is the Forces of Portugal, being commanded by Rules. He's got 4 units of sword and buckler men, who are light infantry. I don't know very much about this mod. I've only ever played a handful of games, but from what I have read about it, there's a very specific dynamic to the way that units will beat other units. And I don't think it's quite so simple as the kind of triangle system, basically, that most modern Total War games have, where like cavalry beats infantry regardless, except for spear infantry, who beats cavalry, and like sword or axe infantry beats spears. There's more to it than that, so it's not necessarily as straightforward. But once I learn more about it, I'll be able to explain that to you. But in any case, moving on. He's also bringing 1 unit of Portuguese Monster Rebol, which is, they work a lot like an organ gun. I think they do a lot of damage really, really quickly, very rapid fire, but they take a while to reload. Moving in behind, we got a couple units here of the Portuguese arquebusier, who have, I think they have armor piercing, and they've got really short range, and they've also got really cool projectiles. That's one thing to note in this, is that projectiles, one, will stay in the ground for much longer, so you'll be able to see, where you're being shot from, what you're being shot with, and it just overall looks a lot cooler. But also, gun units tend to have their own projectiles that are very obviously gun-related projectiles, and you can see them well at a bird's eye view, so it's very easy to tell what's going on in this mod and from what angle you're being shot at. So that's kind of cool. Just a nice little note there. But yeah, Rules has 2 units of these. He's got 1 unit of Culverin, which from what I understand is not terribly different from your standard cannon unit, except that they've got a little bit more ammunition and they are a little bit more accurate. Behind them, we got your bog standard catapult. Does exactly what you'd expect it to do. And then we move on to the main kind of bulk of the skirmish line for Portugal, consisting of 3 units of Pave crossbows, 1 unit of Portuguese cuirassier, and he's also got 2 units of, where are they? The mailed Lusitanian infantry, who I think are medium tier infantry. They are mailed, and they've got shields, but they also toss javelins, so they can do a lot of damage. Javelins in this, very, very good, especially against heavy cavalry. And behind them, we got a couple units of Lusitanian cavalry, who do the same thing as their dismounted counterpart. I think that's mostly it. He's got very little infantry. Mostly is there to hold the line to give the skirmish forces the time they need to do their good work. Moving on now to the center, we have the Forces of Poland, being commanded by Alexei Mazzara, who is actually the creator of this mod, so he knows the ins and outs of units very, very well. I think it's like a 1 or 2 person dev team, or maybe he's the only dev, but he has a team of testers. But in any case, Alexei definitely knows what he's doing in this game. He's got 2 units of dismounted Polish knights, I think 3 units of mounted Polish nobles, 1 unit of hussars, who, despite being light cavalry, from what I understand, they are really good. But with those lances, I think they're generally aimed at taking out other cavalrymen, for example. Melee cavalry, very good at fighting infantry, but spear cavalry, not so good at fighting infantry, but very good at taking out other cavalry. Even if they're light cavalry, you can throw them in there against some heavily mounted cavalrymen, and they will actually hold their own reasonably well. They usually won't destroy them. The heavy cavalry will win, but the heavy cavalry will take a lot of casualties, disproportionate to what it costs to bring as a unit of light cav with spears. In the case, he's got 2 units of cav militia, 1 here, 1 on the other wing. His center consists mostly of Polish spear nobles, backed up by the Sudovian tribesmen. These guys have low defense, but they have high armor-piercing damage, whereas the Polish spear nobles don't have a whole lot of damage behind them, but they are able to hold a line. So these 2 units complement each other on the battle line really well. He's also bringing 1 unit of cannon. This is other unit of cav militia. And behind, he's got 1 unit of arquebusier. He's got a unit of musketeers hanging out over there, a unit of crossbow militia, and 1 unit of dismounted Lithuanian cavalry, who I think have a shield value, so they're decent skirmishers on the ground. I think they're just a little bit more expensive than your average bog standard militia archer unit. And finally, he has 1 unit of General's Bodyguard, which is where his Polish general is going to be hanging out. I think that does it for his forces. So let's move on now to the third and final. I'm going to call them the defenders because they're in a defensive position and they aren't as aggressive as the other people. The third and final defending army, this being the army of Russia, commanded by Apollo. And Russia, I think, is going to be one of my favorite factions in this game because they are very anti-infantry and anti-armor focused. They've got a lot of really cheap, really powerful armor-piercing units, but they do tend to lack a lot in their skirmishing department. That being said, their cavalry, especially their Druzhina cavalry, is great at taking down other heavily mounted cavalrymen, and their Tsar's Guard costs a lot of money to bring, but damn are they strong. Yeah, they're very much the battering ram of the cavalry force for Russia. But in any case, Apollo's bringing 2 units of cannon, 1 unit of dismounted Schlechta bodyguard. I don't know what that means, but they are very powerful. 3 HP, armor piercing, but not a lot of numbers, so they can be overwhelmed by lesser infantry. He's got 1 unit of crossbow militia and 2 units of Cossack musketeers. You're going to see a lot of gunpowder in this, and that's because gunpowder is much more reasonable than it is in the vanilla game. They do still, I think, have the armor piercing and morale damage that they normally do, but it's not as pronounced. You'll see that effect more over time rather than right away all at once. Over here we got 1 unit of Druzhina. He's also got another one in the back there as well. You can see them. He's got, I think he's actually got 3 units of Druzhina, to be perfectly honest. 1 unit of Javcav militia, 4 units of Sadovian tribesmen, who he's backing up with 3 units of Berdish axemen, who have very low numbers, but they have multiple HP, but they are very useful, or not very useful, they're very weak against missile units. But they've got AP and a lot of charge bonus. I think they have like 25 AP charge bonus, which is amazing. So these guys don't cost a lot to bring either, so they're a very cost-effective way to deal with other heavy infantry units, and they make great support. I think finally he's got 3 units of noble axemen. 1, 2, 3. Yes, 3 units of them who have 2 HP, lots of armor, decent defense values all around, and of course they are AP as well. So that does it for the defenders. Let's go ahead and let's take a look at what the attackers are bringing to the battle today. The first attacking army we're going to look at is the forces of Milan, being commanded by Zaid. I think he's one of the testers alongside a couple of the other people in this battle for Alexei, so he definitely has a good handle on how to build an army and how to use it. He's got 4 units of mounted sergeants, all light cav, but very useful for bringing down other heavily mounted cavalry because they are armed with their spears. He's got a couple units of armored sergeants, presumably to back up his cavalry. 2 units of feudal knights. Feudal knights still the workhorse unit that is available to most of the factions, and of course they've got their own faction-specific skins as well. And they're not super expensive, and you'll be able to bring a fair amount of them. Behind them he's got a unit of arquebusiers, 2 units of dismounted men-at-arms, 1 unit of general's bodyguard. Very low numbers for the general's bodyguards, but they have 3 HP, armor piercing, and they can do a ton of work, but obviously it's very easy to overwhelm them or to shoot them down with missile units and artillery. Behind them he's got a couple units of mailed wardens, who I believe are AP, given that they have their maces. It's usually a good bet looking at what a unit has, like physically in their hands on the model, in order to understand what their capabilities are. So it's fairly intuitive that way. Finally, we've got a couple units here of the Genoese crossbows, Pavi crossbows, so good, so strong in a skirmish fight, and they've got surprising range that you wouldn't expect a crossbow unit to have. And finally, he has brought the Jesus wagon. He's got a unit here of the Carrocchio standard, mounted on top of this this big frame here with a bell. I'm not sure what the significance of the bell is. Maybe it's from a church or it's a holy relic or something. And finally, he's got 1 unit of Colverin to round off his artillery force, his skirmish force. Moving on now, we have the Egyptian forces being commanded by DI, who you've probably seen in a lot of videos, and I think you'll probably understand why he has so much cav, as he traditionally plays Rohan in 3rd Age Reforged. He's got 2 units of Arab cavalry. I believe he's got 2 units. Yeah, he's definitely got 2 units of Arab cav, 2 units of Mamluk archers, 1 unit of the, what are these guys called? Khwarizmian cav. He's also got 2 units of Alan Light Cav, who are great at taking down cavalry. I've seen heavy cavalry lose to these guys quite handily if that heavy cav gets taken at a disadvantage by the Alan Light Cav. So a lot of cav on his main line. He's also got, I believe, 5 units of the dismounted Ghulams, who are all AP, and they look cool. Look at that. I love the armor for these guys with those mail masks. They just look awesome. He's got 1 unit of cannon. I think he's also got 3 units of Nubian archers, who have a ton in their unit, 250, so it's not easy to skirmish these guys down. I don't think they have a ton of missile damage, however. He's also got a couple units of desert archers, 1 here, 1 on the other flank. Unless we've got a couple more mounted sergeants here, so maybe there's 6 units of mountain sergeants for the Milanese player. I think that just about does it for... Oh no, actually there's one unit here of the Tabarderia who work a lot like the Bardiche Axemen. I don't think they're very expensive. I think they've got multiple HP, and of course they are AP, so they make great support units. Moving on now to the third and final attacking army, we have the Forces of Scotland, being commanded by King X Destroyer, another one of the testers for the mod. He's got 4 units of Feudal Knights, 1 unit of Catapult, 6, I believe, units of Highland Nobles. These are really strong shock infantry. He's also got, I believe, 4 or 5 units of the Noble Archers, and finally... Actually, no, I think that just about does it for him. He's got 4 units of the Feudal Knights, 6 Archers. Oh no, he's got General's Bodyguard as well. There it is. Hanging out right there. His General. So that just about does it for the army comps. Let's go ahead and let's jump into the replay. As the battle begins, we can see skirmishing forces for both sides forming up in the center. Egypt has moved forward with their expendable Nubian archers, possibly to soak up any arrow fire, or maybe to get some of the cannons on Alexi's side to target them. But let's take a look at some of the terrain features while everyone gets themselves into position. First and foremost is this very large canyon in the center here, which is the linchpin of any defense trying to hold down this canyon area. And naturally it's going to be a place that the attackers gravitate to because it is less choke pointish than the other portions of the map. So there's a large front here that gives the defenders and the attackers a lot of flexibility in terms of how they want to approach this. And it's not just one giant choke point either. There is a way around over here as well. So any defending forces may find themselves stretched very thin if the attackers have the numbers and the power to assault both of these choke points at once. So it's not just one big choke point that's an automatic win for the defenders, which is one of the things that I like about Igni Ferroque. The maps that it adds are balanced in one way or another. Not necessarily balanced for every situation, but they are definitely, in my opinion, balanced, much better balanced than some of the vanilla mods. Now, over on this end, where the Portuguese have chosen to make their camp, you can see that there's basically 3 levels here that also allow an opportunity for attackers to swing wide around that center defense. Now, naturally, if there's an ally over here, they're going to want to defend this, and I think what you'll find is that people will defend the top 2 sections of this canyon, because this stationing forces up here prevents them, the attackers rather, from bringing forces up there to fire down into the other 2 layers of defense, and holding down this second point means that they can put any pressure that they need to on forces that try to make this crossing. Now moving on to the right flank, which is by far the strongest portion of the defense in my opinion, and that is largely due to the terrain. It's impossible to be outflanked here. There's only one way up into the central plateau, which allows the forces over here to set up some pretty decent skirmishing lines that they can use to support either end. They can support the right flank if they need to, or they can bring some forces over here to get some beautiful enfilading fire into any attackers that try to ford this canyon crossing. It's also very easy to lock down with a small amount of units. You can see this choke point here is relatively less wide than the center choke point, so you can station maybe 5 or 6 units here, maybe some mainline infantry, some reserves, and a couple units of archers, and lock it down for pretty much ever. Pikes would be an excellent choice for this. Pikes are very defensive, and they're nearly impossible to break through from the front. They don't do a lot of damage, but over a long period of time, they will poke you to death, and it's very hard to penetrate their pike walls with mass and things like that. So you will need a lot of archers, and that's the only real counter to a pike wall or a solid infantry wall inside of this area. And it does kind of leave this constant menace on the flank of the attackers that can very easily break out and cause problems for them. Let's go ahead and let's turn it up to full speed. There's a extended skirmish fight going on here between Alexei Mazzaro and the cannon crews of Egypt. It looks like Egypt definitely not having any luck right now. One of their cannons has already gone down to the artillery of Alexei Mazzaro and his Polish forces. Over here we can see Egypt moving up with their cav, moving themselves behind this rock face, trying to shield their cavalry as best as they can from any incoming missile fire, especially from the cannon and things like that, which can do a serious amount of damage to Egypt if allowed to do so. Now over here you can see the Nubian archers moving forward, Not a bad idea at all, although they are a little bit unsupported. Maybe that's why the cav is over here as well, in order to support the archers in case the Polish decide they want to sally out with their cavalry. But what he's going to do is he's going to use those Nubian archers to target this artillery piece, and not necessarily kill the artillery crew, but at least disrupt them long enough to allow their artillery to maybe snipe them out, or to at least take the pressure off of their front lines, because those cannons left unchecked can be a serious nuisance. Yeah, it looks like those cannons are having a great time right now. They've done a lot of damage to that cav over there, starting to take a bite out of the Tabarderia, who are pretty important. They can do a lot of work, so you don't want to lose them to artillery like that. And you can see a lot of dead horses over here as well. It looks like some of the horse archers, some of the Mamluks, I think, have fallen to that constant cannon fire. Over on the left, we can see some Arab cavalry moving forward, probably wanting to get a piece of this cavalry out here. You got the hussars. So the Egyptian faction definitely has local superiority in terms of their cavalry, and they will probably use that to great effect, I'm sure, once these Polish hussars begin to move forward, which indeed they are doing. They want to get a piece of those Nubian archers, who are now well within range, to put pressure on that cannon crew. But it doesn't look like Egypt realizes what's happening here, although they are going to realize perhaps a little bit too late. The archers are going to turn their fire onto the Polish hussars, drive them back. A close but timely charge from the Allen Light Cav is going to see those hussars off and cause them to retreat back towards their lines after having taken heavy casualties. But the hussars looking like they're not done yet. Those Nubians definitely present a serious threat to their artillery crew. But now that they've been driven back, it looks like maybe the Polish cannon is going to fall to those Nubian archers. Over here we can see some of the Polish nobles, some missile cav, positioning themselves on the other end, some of this cavalry militia being driven back by the Mamluk archers, and by, actually no, but just by 2 units of Mamluk archers. We're going to hold that down just with the range pressure that they can bring to bear. And there's a lot of cavs swarming over this area, so if the Polish decide they want to try and break out, then the Egyptians, I think, are going to be more than ready for them. If we look over on the other end, we can see the Milanese getting themselves into possibly a little bit of a pickle. The dismounted feudal knights charging forward after having taken some pretty heavy losses from the Cossack musketeers and the crossbow militia from Russia that are both well positioned up there on that plateau to just rain fire down upon the feudal knights. And now with the AP from the Sudovian tribesmen and the large numbers that they can bring to bear, this is not going to be a fun fight for that Milanese front line. He doesn't want to lose his dismounted feudal knights and his dismounted men-at-arms so early into the battle, because they compose the dangerous front line that the Milanese have. And after that, all they've really got is spearmen. Now you can see that the Milanese have left this one corner of the line open, and that's because they want to just mount constant cavalry charges, just cycle charges into these Sudovian tribesmen, which is going to do a lot of damage to them. They are not spear infantry, so this is going to be a battle of slow attrition between these mounted sergeants and the Sudovian tribesmen. And there's a lot of mounted sergeants to go around. As we saw, there were 6 units of them. So breaking through the Sudovian right flank here may be a possibility in the next few turns, in the next few minutes. Now over here we can see some of the Arab cavalry launching an attack against the Polish nobles. Some spear nobles here are going to move forward to help them drive back the light cav from Egypt. And that is going to be a bit of a massacre, actually. You can see those Arab cavalry just falling apart. Those Nubian archers trying to lend as much support as they can, but those heavily armored and shielded Polish nobles are going to stand up to that really well. Really, the only danger, I think, from those archers is to the Sudovian tribesmen, who are a major part of the killing power of Alexei Mazaro's army. So if they can be thinned out or neutralized, then that's going to be a big deal for Egypt. Moving over here, the Polish hussars moving in very quickly into the unprotected Nubian archers. It looks like most of the Arab cav and the other cavalry as well is being driven back. Those Mamluks not having a good time. The Allen Light Cavs now in full retreat. The Mamluks about to find themselves trapped in the aftermath of this two-pronged Polish assault. You can see some Sudovian tribesmen moving over here, and look at this. A wonderful pinning action from the Sudovian tribesmen moving into the Mamluk archers. DI getting caught, I think, a little bit by surprise. The Sudovians are going to get a nice rear charge into those Mamluk archers, and the Polish nobles are going to set themselves up to toss their javelin payloads into these unprotected archers, and they're going to rout almost immediately and flee as quickly as they can out of that pincer movement. But the damage has really been done to Egypt's cavalry corps. Look at this. Hussars chasing the Allen Light Cav far afield after routing the archers. Some more Polish cavalry militia coming in to deal with what remains of these Alan Lycav, who are actually going to get caught out by some spear cavalry. So even though they are militia, they are going to be able to do a fair amount of damage to those Alan Lycav. Yeah, you can see them begin to drop there, despite the disparity in quality and cost. Egyptian heavy cavalry moving forward. I think this is the Egyptian bodyguard moving into the center to try and drive back that cavalry militia. Unfortunately, his Alan Lycav suffering very, very heavily. See if this cavalry militia managed to get away. Doesn't look like it. They are going to suffer a big charge here from heavily armored spear cavalry. And that's going to be all she wrote for those forces in the center. Moving on over here, you can see the mounted sergeants taking a beating from the dismounted Lithuanian cavalry of Alexei Mazaro and the cannonade that's up there as well from Apollo. There's more and more skirmishers up there that can just pour fire down indiscriminately into those light cavalrymen. Not a good place for Milan to leave their cavalry at this point, I think. Right here you can see the Genoese crossbows coming under heavy fire from the skirmishers up there on the plateau. Over on the infantry line, the Sadovian tribesmen have been driven back very heavily on the right, and the Milan player, in accordance with his strategy, has moved in with a lot of infantry to consolidate their gains. Now there's the noble axemen have been committed to the battle. That is going to be a serious problem. I don't know if they saw the axemen hiding over there behind the plateau, but Milan has definitely committed very heavily here with a lot of heavily armed units, and the anti-armor capabilities of Russia are going to shine in this kind of situation. Now, they are kind of being driven back just by sheer weight of numbers, and there is some support over here from the Genoese crossbows now that they've got themselves more or less shielded from the vast majority of the Russian skirmishers. Most of these Russian Cossack musketeers don't have indirect fire, so they're going to have a hard time firing down across that cliff face. So those Genoese crossbows are now perfectly placed because of that to put a lot of pressure on the Russian left. And you can see these noble axemen, look at that, victory turning into defeat very quickly because of the high damage and AP that those Genoese crossbows can bring to bear. And they've got good numbers there too. So only a breakthrough by some cavalry or surprise attack from the Polish in the center is going to be enough to put pressure on these Genoese crossbows and prevent them from breaking that Russian left. See that Russia is now moving down with their dismounted Schlechta bodyguard, and that's a really tough unit. It'll be interesting to see where he applies them. Probably over here on the flank, because the Russians are winning quite decisively in the center. Yeah, so this could be the downfall of the Milanese strategy. He's really stacked his wings here, and his wings are putting a lot of pressure on the Russians, especially over there on the left. But if his center breaks, they will be able to break through, surround the wings, and manage to get into his skirmishers as well. Let's move on to the other flank and see what exactly the Portuguese are up to. They've moved in with their entire army as a flanking force, which is going to force Scotland to commit quite heavily to its defense. Now, there's a lot of feudal knights here that can do a lot of work on those sword and bucklermen, so I think maybe this would be a good time to move forward with those feudal knights and try and break up the Portuguese front line. Now, he'd have to combine that very effectively with some infantry to follow up, because there's a lot of skirmishers back here, and they will cut down those heavily armored knights really, really quickly. But if he uses those knights effectively in a mass charge, sweeps away the front line, and then follows that up with infantry, hopefully routs the Portuguese, then he will be able to get in there and cause some havoc with the skirmishers with his own heavy infantry. Because the real weakness of the Portuguese forces right now is the fact that their front line is so sparse. They don't have any spearmen, and they've got the male Lusitanian infantry and things like that, which I don't think are spear armored. I think they just have javelins, and then maybe they use like swords or something once they've tossed them. So there's not a lot of anti-cav here aside from the anti-armor missiles. So now I think is the time for decisive action on the part of Scotland. But unfortunately, King X Destroyer does not seem too inclined to move forward, and I honestly don't blame him all that much. That's a really imposing skirmish line to try and charge into, and naturally casualties will be very, very high. Oh man, I don't know what just happened, but over here these mounted sergeants dropping like flies. I think maybe Alexei Mazaro has got his cannon back online, and indeed he does. So he's putting some pressure on the reserve cavalry units that Milan has lent to Scotland. A lot of them actually. Look at that. These poor mounted sergeants just taking a huge beating from that not catapult, artillery piece. Now over here, Egypt has decided to mobilize the rest of his army, and it looks like Scotland is actually going to commit some Highland nobles to the cause as well. These Highland nobles will do work on those Polish spear nobles, and indeed on the lightly armored Sudovian tribesmen. So that presents a serious menace to the forces of Alexei Mazarov, which I think he realizes. So he's going to move forward with his Polish hussars, try and get a nice charge off on these Highland nobles. But I think ultimately that's going to be the end of those hussars, and he knows it, of course. But this is just a delaying action on the part of Alexei Mazarov, which actually bore some serious fruit in terms of the casualties that they inflicted on those Scottish nobles. So now the center of Scotland has taken some serious damage, and I think he's going to need Egypt to follow him up with some serious support. Egypt has moved forward with their skirmishers. Over here, the Highland nobles. Oh man, look at this. You can see the arquebusier doing a lot of work on these Highland nobles. And actually, now's a good time to take a look at some of those custom projectile models that I think were created by the Igni Ferroque team. Yeah, look at that. Those arquebusiers are basically shotguns, really good for taking down hordes. Nice charge here from the Sudovian tribesman is going to prevent those Highland nobles from getting into his front lines. Alexei Mazarov taking the fight to the Highland nobles instead of just waiting for that inevitable devastating charge. Over here we can see some Russian Druzhina looking like they want to take advantage of these holes in the attacking front line. And look at that, the presence of those cav and the charge from the Sudovian tribesmen is going to rout those Highland nobles. So the attack force now in complete disarray. Over here we can see some feudal knights from Scotland have charged into the Polish spear nobles. Not a real good fight for those feudal knights, and they're actually going to take a lot of damage and begin to rout really quickly despite their high numbers, but naturally they will be able to come back. I think part of that has to do with the musketeers in the back here, who were able to put some serious fire into those feudal knights and break their morale. But yeah, now the attackers are in full retreat, and Poland is going to have a chance either to consolidate or to move forward. But as all of that is going on, we can see that the Russians have actually managed to break through the Milanese line. Oh my goodness, those Genoese crossbows in a lot of trouble. A mass rout here being pursued, I think, by what is a majority of Russian troops. They're going to be able to get over here into the arquebusiers, who I think are okay in melee combat. Not amazing, not enough to deal with these heavily armored elite noble axemen, but they will at least hold the line and give some of these Milanese troops over here a chance to reform. You can see Scotland bringing over some of his own Highland nobles to help out the Milanese cause, but there's large numbers of these guys, 84 and 82 in this unit here. They will start to reform pretty quickly. Looks like the Russian bodyguard may be getting a little bit too far ahead of itself. If they get caught out, then their general will get cut down, and possibly the Russians may begin to rout. Over here, the armored sergeants trying to hold down the rest of the line. Looks like some of these men-at-arms have not fled from combat completely yet. I think there's another unit of them that's back there and running for its life right now, but these guys standing their ground well. Dismounted Lithuanian cavalry, these are archers, going to charge into the center. Looks like they're going after the general's bodyguard. And that charge from the rear is actually going to kill the Milanese general. A very nice opportunistic charge, but those dismounted Lithuanian cavalry don't like being in melee, and they are actually going to flee en masse. And the general's bodyguard is going to give pursuit, vengeful over the loss of their commander. Moving on the other side, looks like the Portuguese have finally moved forward, and damn are they doing work. Look at this, male Lusitanian infantry. I think they were backing up the sword and bucklermen and have managed to do a lot of damage to that Scottish front line. There's just not enough here. Some Highland nobles, fairly heavily reduced, charging forward, but they're going to be very vulnerable to that missile fire. Look at this, the Portuguese arquebusier putting a lot of fire into those nobles, and that, along with the rest of the missile fire, is going to drive back that charging unit and cause them to break. Over here in the center, the Scottish Highland nobles trying to do whatever it is that they can, but there's just too much skirmishing power on the part of the Portuguese, and they are ultimately going to overwhelm these Scots here, and they're not going to be able to do a whole lot before they begin to rout as well. So the Scottish flank, I suppose this is the attacking right flank, is lost here. The Portuguese came in like an absolute wrecking ball and just tore apart the feudal knights and everything that Scotland had stationed here, which just wasn't enough to go toe-to-toe with their skirmishing army, and they've now driven them back. So now in the center, what do we got here? Feudal knights from Scotland. This is where the rest of the Scottish forces are putting up a stand. They're going to charge forward and take the place of these mounted sergeants as they begin to flee. They're actually going to catch, I think, oh no, those are the dismounted Gulams. They're going to go right into the Polish spear nobles, but ultimately this is not a fight that those heavily armored feudal knights can win in melee. Actually, you can see here the arrows stay a little bit longer, so it's a lot more immersive and looks a lot cooler. Just a quick little note. But the Polish spear nobles, I think, are ultimately going to be able to drive back most of these guys. Over here, the dismounted Gulams not doing well alongside the Scottish noble Highland archers. Polish spear nobles and their Sudovian allies are going to ultimately drive back the attackers, and I don't think that they're going to be able to recover from this. They've lost too many resources and too many charges into the defending lines. Let's see how Milan is doing. Maybe with the addition of some of these Scottish nobles over here, they will be able to drive back the Russian forces. And it looks like they've managed to stabilize a little bit. Some dismounted Gulams from Egypt has been added to the equation as well, which is really nice for the defending left flank, but I think it might have weakened the assault a little bit too much in the center, which ultimately caused their downfall, because those Polish nobles are still standing strong. Noble Axemen here starting to lose in the face of these anti-armor dismounted Gulams. Over here we can see some of the general's bodyguard hacking down the Noble Axemen. Ultimately, though, I don't think there's going to be enough of these guys to really make a difference. There's some Bardiche Axemen in there as well. Yeah, those cavalrymen are really outclassed. With the addition of these Scottish nobles, though, I think they might be fresh. Indeed, they are. That might be enough, I think, with a nice rear/flank charge into these Noble Axemen. That may be enough to break through the lines. Genie's crossbows, I think, just hacked down the Russian general. So now Russia is missing its general. With an attack in the flank like this, the Noble Axemen may begin to rout. Over here we can see Russia responding with some of their Jav Cav coming out furiously, just tossing their AP skirmish or their AP missiles into this large blob of attacking soldiers. Let's see what we got here. It looks like, oh no, the Highland nobles decided they wouldn't charge into the flank of those Noble Axemen, and that is because they wanted to leave it open to the arquebusiers to do their bloody work. And damn, are they doing a lot of damage. Look at that. The Noble Axemen are going to begin to rout. Looks like the Scottish general just got himself gunned down by Portugal. The only place the attackers seem to be winning, or at least doing well, is over here on their left flank. In the center, looks like a complete nightmare. Yeah, look at this. The Gulams now in full retreat. The Polish nobles giving chase. The attackers have definitely been broken over here. And over on the side of Portugal, it looks like they're just kind of mopping things up, consolidating, and I'm sure they'll begin to move out towards the attacking center and just slowly roll up the attacking line. Not that there's much left of it at this point anyway. Here we got some Polish nobles charging into some desert archers, running them down, just keeping all of these units routing. The Polish nobles hacking people down. Oh, these poor dismounted Gulams, I don't think they're going to have a chance to be able to reform, which means that the attacking lines have been broken once and for good. Yeah, the attackers now in full retreat. Lithuanian cavalry giving chase to anything that could possibly pose a threat. Looks like they're going after the Genie's crossbows. Managed to get off one final volley before the Lusitanians charge into them, bowling over the front ranks. Oh man, this poor Genie's crossbows not going to be able to hold on. They're going to start to flee, I think. Maybe they've lost their general at this point or something like that. And actually, yeah, they have. I remember him dying. So the Lusitanian cavalry and the Portuguese cuirassiers are going to be able to move into the back of what remains of the attackers alongside the Polish cavalry from the center. And this, I think, is going to be all she wrote. Looks like we have the Egyptian general's bodyguard over here, hacking down all the remains of the Russians. The Russians, I think, have lost most of their force at this point. Some of the dismounted Gulams are about to charge in to that Jav Cav, but they're going to be drawn back at the last second by DI. I don't think he realized just how close these guys were to getting a piece of those Jav Cav, and ultimately, he's just going to turn his back to those skirmish units, and he's going to get himself cut down in return. Look at that. You can see some of the crossbow militia putting in some fire into the dismounted Gulams. They're going to turn around, DI realizing his mistake, and they're going to charge into those Jav Cav, but ultimately it is way too late. Those Gulams have taken so much damage at this point that just not enough of them are going to connect there. But looks like the Egyptian cavalry is going to come in to support his infantry and shatter the cavalry militia line. Charge right through, get into the dismounted Lithuanian cavalry, and cause a lot of problems for the Polish and Russian skirmishers. Close behind, though, you can see some allied cavalry, some Polish nobles charging in to support the Egyptian heavy cav. Actually, they're just going to run right through. It looks like they were trying to get some space to turn around and charge right back. And boom, that's going to be a big charge into the Polish nobles and into those dismounted Lithuanian cavalry. The Egyptian bodyguard getting a lot of kills, but there's just not enough of them left to stand up to this Jav Cav and to the newly arrived unit of Polish nobles. And there you have it, the Egyptian general now fallen. I think that's pretty much it for the attackers. Yeah, they may have like forces here and there, but I think they're largely scattered. Yeah, Portugal moving in. Portugal really was able to play a decisive point, or a decisive role in this battle. They've really kept their forces intact. They shattered Scotland and pulled off a lot of Scottish forces that could have been used to help break Alexei Mazzaro in the center, which ultimately would have resulted, I think, in the loss of the defending right flank as well as their center, which would have allowed the attackers to wheel around and present a united front to Portugal if he got himself bogged down with Scotland. So yeah, the Portuguese player did a lot of work that battle. Alexei Mazzaro, though, was definitely on the front lines the whole time against several different factions, coming in with the most kills. The Scottish, unfortunately, got shut down hard, and I think a lot of that had to do with being counter-comped by the Portuguese. The Portuguese had so many missiles that they could use, and all that the Scottish player had was missiles of his own, which admittedly are not bad, but he had shock infantry that lacked shields, so they were just not able to stand up to that iron rain, and ultimately they were driven back and destroyed. And also the Scottish player kind of spread himself a little bit thin. We could see him admirably trying to support his allies in their assaults on the center and the defending right flank, but ultimately he just didn't have the forces they needed to combat Portugal, and of course, as I mentioned earlier, he was really at a disadvantage in terms of the missile fight. Egypt, I think, did their best, again, trying to support their allies as much as they could. We saw some dismounted ghulams over there on the defending right, but ultimately, the forces of Alexei Mazzaro just stood against everything that the attackers could throw at them, and I think a lot of that had to do with how aggressive he played. He didn't wait for people to come to him. He looked for a fight that he looked like he could win, like charging out with those Sudovian tribesmen, and while peppering the Highland nobles with his missile units, and just broke the defenders time and time again, and prevented them from doing what they needed to do. And ultimately, I think that was probably one of the other decisive points in the battle. But in any case, my name is Jordan, also known as JMonster. I hope you guys have enjoyed this mod. I know I want to play a lot more with it. In fact, I've got a replay on this mod that will be coming up for you guys pretty quickly. It's going to be an FFA, but it's not going to come out before some more of our campaign, and then I'm going to follow up our campaign when we get to episode 20 with 2 new Third Age replays. So you will be seeing some more Igni Ferroque in the future, but it won't be for, I would probably say, about a week. But in any case, I will see you guys next time. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.